Hello! Time for part two. As you can see, between filming these two videos, basically all I've done is shaved. So, uh, it's just a couple of hours later than the previous video. So, uh, the other half of the video relating to part four of Words of Radiance. Um, there's a lot to talk about here. I have like sort of three major topics I want to talk about, but there is just a little thing I want to talk about first, which has absolutely nothing to do with this particular part of the book. It's just a thought I had about the series overall, which is the covers for the Stormlight books are weird, right? Like, I know there's lots of different covers, but I mean like the original iconic covers for each book. It's weird that none of them depict that book's focus character. Why isn't Kaladin on the cover of The Way of Kings? Why isn't Shallan on the cover of Words of Radiance instead of Kaladin, who is? Why is there some other female character who I don't know who it is yet on the cover of Oathbringer instead of Dalinar? And I don't actually know for sure who the focus character of Rhythm of War is, but it's not Shallan, because Shallan is the focus character of this book, and yet Shallan is on the cover of that book. What's going on there? Who's making the decisions as to what to put on the covers? Like my first thought when I realized this was like, oh, they put Kaladin on the cover of Words of Radiance because it's like a more dynamic, interesting character to draw than Shallan. But like, they then put Shallan on the cover of Rhythm of War, so clearly they're fine with putting Shallan on covers, just not the cover where it would be most appropriate. I don't know. I'm just confused by the marketing decisions around the cover art. Um, anyway, several important things to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about are the little quotes at the beginning of every chapter here. This is probably the most important that those have been since Hero of Ages. Because here what we have is a bunch of quotes which are being said, written, I'm not sure, by someone to Hoid. And it's clear from these quotes, because this person is talking to Hoid, and they are saying that, oh, I agree with you about the danger race poses. That's race as in R-A-Y-S-E, not race as in the sociological concept of race. Maybe I should say raise. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce the name. I'll just say raise, because then it doesn't sound like race. So, raise. Yeah, this person is saying to Hoid, I agree with you about the threat raise poses. And that means that in the previous book, those quotes, which I had assumed at the time were also from someone to Hoid, those are actually quotes from Hoid to this person who is now talking to Hoid. Because in those quotes in the previous book, Hoid was essentially emphasizing how dangerous this person named Raze is. And we didn't really get much info about who or what Raze is, except an implication, from what I remember, sort of foggily, that this person named Raze did some serious harm to the world of Elantris, I believe? Maybe? I can't remember if that's what... I know that was my conclusion, but I can't remember if that was explicit or implicit. Anyway, here we have a lot more explicit information in these quotes. Let me just find the quote. Yeah. Raze is captive. He cannot leave the system he now inhabits. His destructive potential is therefore inhibited. Whether this was Tanavast's design or not, millennia have passed without Ray's taking the life of another of the 16. Okay, so we know from a conversation that Kaladin had with the Stormfather in the previous book that Tanavast is, I think, another name for honor. Honor the god, not the abstract concept. Because the Stormfather called Kaladin child of Tanavast, child of honor, which I took to mean that those are synonyms. They might be two separate things, but for now I'm going to assume that that means that Tanavast is a name associated with honor. Does that mean that Raise is a name for odium? Like sort of honor and odium are what they abstractly represent, but Tanavast and Raise are the names of the actual individuals currently holding that power. Because we know from Mistborn that these gods in the Cosmere, whatever they are, like their power can be held by different people. When a different person holds within themselves the power of preservation, that person is now preservation. So that means that just because an entity is odium doesn't mean that odium is their only name. They can have like a regular person's name as well. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but I think that makes sense. So yeah, Raise I'm going to assume is odium's name. I don't know what that means exactly, but it does say taking the life of another of the 16 in the context of talking about Tanavast's design. So I'm guessing that when odium killed honor, or Raise killed Tanavast, that's what they're referring to when they say another of the 16. So the 16, I'm guessing, are the gods of the Cosmere, like ruin, preservation, odium, cultivation, honor. Those 5 we have names for so far. So there's 16 of those, so there's 11 more out there. And we only know of, and I only know of 2 other worlds in the Cosmere so far. The world of Elantris, which I think is called Cell, and the world of Warbreaker, whose name I don't actually know. So I'm guessing that those 11 aren't all on those 2 planets. I'm guessing there's, and actually I know that there's more worlds in the Cosmere. There's like short stories set on other worlds that I haven't read yet, which I will soon, by the way. Anyway, so going forward from this point, whenever someone refers to Raise, I'm going to assume they are referring to odium. Until I am proven wrong, which I'm sure I will be, because I don't know what the odds are that I will guess something in this insane meta story that the Cosmere has going on. It's so complicated and so high concept. We'll see how well I'm able to keep track of it going forward. So far, I feel like I'm doing a decent job, personally. But we'll see. Okay, so that's it for the chapter heading quote things. I really need to think up a good terminology for those, because I talk about them a lot in these books, and I don't know what to call them. Anyway, let's talk about Taravangian. So, Taravangian is fascinating. He is a masterclass in characterization and in making an interesting and compelling character with very little. He's had this one chapter and like a handful of scenes in the previous book, and yet he is already, I would say, a character with more depth and that I am more intrigued by than almost any major character from Mistborn Era 1. Which isn't like a knock on Mistborn Era 1. I love Mistborn Era 1. But I'm just pointing out that, like, Sanderson's characterization skills in Stormlight are on another level. He has leveled up as a writer massively, and I pay attention to this stuff because I'm also a writer, so I like pay attention to the specific technical skills being exhibited by writers, and I am super impressed by what's going on with characters specifically in Stormlight. I'm impressed with everything else as well, but especially with characterization, because minor characters like this just shine. Now, we find out some fascinating stuff about Taravangian, which makes him a really, really compelling antagonist. I don't want to say villain, but definitely antagonist. So, let me just try and make sense of this. Taravangian at some point went to the Night Watcher, which we still haven't met yet. It's still very vague exactly how the Night Watcher works, but he went to her, and his wish was for the capacity to save the world. So he didn't ask her to save the world. He asked her to give him the capacity to do so, which is a weird thing to wish for. Why not just wish for... I guess her powers are limited. She probably couldn't just save the world on her own. Anyway, so he got the capacity to save the world, and what this actually translated to in practice is that he had a single day of absolutely incredible intelligence, during which he wrote out this intricate diagram for himself, for his self in the future, and then he was never that smart again. And now his intelligence, like, oscillates wildly from day to day. And he's built this whole support structure around himself to essentially keep his own wildly oscillating intellect in check, because both when he is very stupid and when he is very intelligent, he is a danger to others, essentially, as king. Like, he cannot be allowed to exercise his political power except when he's roughly average in intelligence, because if he's too stupid, then obviously he'll do stupid things. Like, he's not fit for office. But if he's too intelligent, there's like a weird exchange going on where the more intelligent he is, the less moral he is. Like, essentially he loses his ability to empathize with others, to like, he completely stops being able to put himself in the shoes of other people, and therefore the things he does are like fascist. Like, it's like this pure machine-like rationality in decision making that doesn't take into account human emotion or well-being at all, just math, basically. And that's interesting. And some of the examples he gives are very, very telling. Like, you know, when he's very intelligent, he's like, oh, I know, let's do eugenics. What's wrong with eugenics? And then when he becomes slightly less intelligent but more empathetic, he's like, oh God, of course I don't want to do eugenics. That's terrible. And this feels like a criticism of a very real kind of guy. I say guy, I mean person, but it's mostly guys, let's be honest, who have these, like, I am purely rational, I'm like a king of rationality, I don't let emotions get in the way of my raw facts. And then when you're like, oh, and what facts are those? And then they're like, oh, I think we should do eugenics. Like, that's a weirdly common one, actually. So yeah, I totally agree with him that his super intelligent self clearly cannot be trusted to make moral decisions. What I'm baffled by, though, is the fact that he's aware of that. He's aware that his, like, above average intelligent self shouldn't be trusted to make decisions. But he has dedicated his life to fulfilling the plan of a version of himself that is even more intelligent than that, and therefore even less empathetic and moral. Like, the version of Taravangian that wrote the diagram was clearly a monster. And I'm confused why he doesn't see it that way. Like, why he seems to think that it's worth doing what that version of himself wanted, when even much less super intelligent and super evil versions of himself he immediately recognizes as evil and not worth following the advice of. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's hard committed to a monstrously evil plan from a version of himself that he, by all rights, should know is monstrously evil. I guess he's trusting in the... I guess he's trusting too much in the Night Watcher, because I guess he's trusting that when he... that because of the nature of his wish, the thing that his hyper-intelligent self figured out must have been the only way to save the world, because, like, that's what he wished for, so he's trusting that that's what he got. So it makes some level of sense, but I don't know. I just know that if I were Taravangian, like if I were in his shoes, I would actively seek to do the opposite of what that version of myself wanted me to do. Like the version of myself that is even more in the direction of the versions of myself that want to do eugenics. Yeah, I'm not trusting that guy. What the hell? I guess I have different priorities than Taravangian. I do actually. Like if you told me that saving the world requires the kinds of atrocities that Taravangian is now complicit in, I would be like, you know what? Let the world burn. I'm not willing to do that shit. But apparently he is. And maybe that's for the best in the long run. Maybe. We'll see. I definitely have the feeling that the ultimate result of all this will not be that Taravangian was right all along. I'm counting on the story proving him wrong. Because something tells me that the person who will actually save the world, the people who will actually save the world, are all the surge binders showing up all over the place, and not this guy. Anyway, so Taravangian has managed to regain control of Seth, which I'm fascinated by. So I was not expecting that. I was expecting that once Seth met Kaladin, that would be the moment where he breaks free from his oath and ceases to be truthless. But I wasn't counting on the extra information which I didn't have, which both Seth and Taravangian are privy to. Which is apparently, and this isn't stated explicitly, but I think this is the implication that I managed to get. The shard blade that Seth carries is not a regular shard blade. It's one of the 10 honor blades. So the original Herald's swords, which we still don't know the nature or origin of. And an honor blade essentially gives you surge binding powers, as though you had a Nahel pact with the Spren, but you don't actually need a pact. You can just have the honor blade and it will give you those powers. So that's what Syl meant when she said that Seth is different from most surge binders, because his power comes from honor blades. From an honor blade, rather. This is interesting for several reasons. It's interesting because Talonel told Amaram, I believe, about where he placed his honor blade. So if Amaram gets that honor blade, that might mean he'll have powers. He'll have surge binding abilities. So that'll be interesting. Because Talonel is one of the heralds, just to clarify. That's why I'm saying that. Talonel is a herald, and therefore whatever blade he has is naturally an honor blade. The other thing that's interesting about this is the implication here. So what Taravangian says to Seth is that he just received word that he's lying, by the way. Like, this isn't true. I'm aware of that. But what he says is that he just received word that one of the remaining honor blades has been stolen, and he says that the reason he just received word and didn't hear earlier is because your people are very secretive, or something like that. This implies that the Shin are the ones who are keeping the honor blades, like the ones aside from Talonel's, which would explain how Seth has one. But what Seth says then is also interesting, because Seth says that he interprets Taravangian's words and says, oh, one of the 7 has been stolen, or something along those lines, which means that the Shin only have 7 honor blades now, which with the one Talonel has and with the one Seth has is 9, which means that there is 1 honor blade unaccounted for. I wonder where that one is. Is that the sword Shallan has? Does Shallan have a goddamn honor blade? Like, that was the first thought I had, just because, like, we don't know where she got her shard blade. Probably not. Like, her sword is probably a regular shard blade. But that was my first thought here. Anyway, I'm just throwing that theory out into the wild, just in case it turns out to be right, so I can be smug about it later. Anyway, there's even more stuff going on in the Taravangian chapter, which is that he talks about the death rattles, which are the quotes people say when they die, that he's been collecting back in Kharbranth. And he implies through his dialogue that there is some kind of entity, presumably a spren, named Molak, who causes the death rattles. And this Molak specifically causes the death rattles through proximity, because I believe Taravangian, when he hears that there's fewer death rattles being recorded in Kharbranth, he thinks that this might mean that Molak has moved on. So there's apparently a spren that just gives people maybe prophetic powers moments before they die, and that spren moves around and does this. And because we've seen people have death rattles on the Shattered Plains, so Molak has a massive range, because Kharbranth and the Shattered Plains are pretty far away from each other. So yeah, I don't know what else to make of that, frankly, except that that's apparently a thing I need to think about now. And the other thing, much more interesting, is that we get confirmation of my theory from the first book, which is that the thrill is not just in-world lingo for adrenaline. The thrill is very much a supernatural thing going on. And it's also not global. It's localized, because apparently it affects Alethkar and Yak-Heved. There's no confirmation that it affects anywhere else, but it's noteworthy that it affects... It's noteworthy that it doesn't affect everyone, because Taravangian notes as interesting that it also affects Yak-Heved, in addition to affecting Alethkar. So maybe it affects all the Vorin nations? Or something? That was my first thought. Like, maybe it's just like a Vorin thing? I don't know. But Taravangian also implies that the thrill, in fact I think he explicitly says, that the thrill is caused by a spren, just like the death rattles, but not the same spren. This thing, the thrill, is caused by something called Nergaul. Now, my original thought was that the thrill was caused by odium, and that could still be true. It's possible that Nergaul is a third name, that it's Nergaul, Ray's, odium, and that all those three refer to the same entity. But I think that's less likely. I think it's more likely that Nergaul is like a greater spren of odium, sort of like how the Stormfather is a greater spren of honor, and the Night Watcher is kind of implied to be a greater spren of cultivation. Yeah, that's my current working theory. That whatever Nergaul is, it's not odium, but it works for odium, like it's associated with odium, because the thrill has to be associated with odium, right? It would be weird if something that makes you more excited and happy when you're killing people isn't associated with something literally called odium, right? Okay, yeah, so those were like the big things that I had to say about this section. Right, there's a couple of small notes I just want to make for the future, just so I have a record of my thoughts, really. So, first of all, Venli, the sister of, what is the name of the main Parshendi? Eshonai, the sister of Eshonai. Venli has clearly been under Odium's control for a while, because Eshonai notes that, like, Eshonai is now under Odium's control, to some extent, and her behavior has changed. And so is Venli, because Venli is now in storm form, which is clearly something that Odium has influence over. But Eshonai looks at Venli and she thinks, oh, her behavior hasn't really changed. Like, she was already acting like this before taking storm form, which to me reads as Venli was under Odium's control for a while, and that's why she pushed for the development of storm form in the first place. I don't know if that's true, but that's my theory right now. What else do I have to say? There's religious riots in Kholinar. On the one hand, I'm excited because the Light Eyes are long overdue to get a revolution against them. So cool, but also don't love the religious aspect of it because it reminds me a bit too much of the Sparrows from Game of Thrones. And I feel it won't end any better than that. Because nothing ends well in this world. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, let me just look through my notes here. I know there was one other thing at least. Yeah, at the very beginning of this part, I believe Sin? What the hell? No, Syl. Not Sin. Syl. Syl tells Kaladin, oh, by the way, I didn't talk about this in the previous video because I forgot that because I talked about it in the previous version of this video, so I forgot to talk about it in my remake of the video. Anyway, I don't think Syl is dead. Whatever happened to Syl at the end of this part of the book, I don't think she's dead, just like I don't think Yasna is dead. I think Syl did something which is inadvisable for Spren to do. I don't know what it is, but I think she did something kind of foolish in order to save Kaladin while he was falling into the chasm. Like, she turned herself into Stormlight or something so that he could consume her, I think. Or like dispersed her sense of self in order to save him somehow. I don't know. I just know that the last thing that we saw of Syl is that Kaladin fell into the chasm, he heard her scream, he got a surge of Stormlight, which helped him survive the fall, and then he never saw or heard from her again. So my guess is that she did something stupid. Well, I mean stupid in the sense that Spren aren't generally supposed to do it, probably. It's unsafe for them. And that's why she's gone. But I think she's gonna come back somehow. So just so you know, that's why I didn't react a lot to Syl's death. Because just like Yasna's death, I just don't buy it as real. Anyway, the thing I wanted to say, just as a random note, is that before she disappears, she talks to Kaladin and she says that she doesn't really care if he breaks the law because the law isn't her thing. And she says that and when she's saying this, she says, I'm not a high Spren. So clearly, high Spren are a type of Spren that cares a lot about laws, and my immediate thought was, oh, that's the kind of Spren that darkness is bonded to. from Lift's chapter. Yeah, that's the only thing I had to say about that. Just wanted to point out that I made that particular connection. Anyway, see you next week for part 5, which I'm hoping will be more easily put into a single video, because I I I have a lot to say about these, as you can tell, and as time goes on, I think I'll only have more and more to say. This series is awakening something within me, I guess. Anyway, yeah, see you next week for the end of Words of Radiance. Bye.